Hello all. So in today's lecture, I'll be doing chapter 8 of legal studies, class 12. So the name of the chapter is legal services. It comes under unit 8. So basically, the introduction of this chapter, they introduce it by explaining us the definition of legal aid. So according to encyclopedia, legal aid is giving to persons of limited means grants or for nominal fees, advice or counsel to represent them in court for civil and criminal matters. So it basically means person of limited means a person who has insufficient funds. So to them we are giving them with grants or for a very nominal fees, for a very nominal amount. We give them advice and counsel to represent them in the court for both civil and criminal matters. So it aims to create a bridge between the poor and rich in the society. So if we see if see the rich can always provide for funds, the rich is never insufficient of funds. So in all the situations like in civil or criminal matters, the rich will always be able to stand out if there is no legal aid given. So this is the reason why legal aid was actually introduced. It was so that the bridge between the rich and poor can be fulfilled. So, and it is also to provide equality to seek justice in the court of law. So, legal aid is to ensure that no one is debarred from legal advice and help because of lack of funds. So, no one is debarred from legal advice means no one is deprived from the legal advice because they are poor. So, this is why legal aid is there, because it ensures that no one is left out from getting legal advice just because they lack funds. So, the provision of legal aid to the poor is based on humanitarian consideration, and the main aim is to help those who are socially and economically backward. So, the main essence of the first introduction paragraph is basically that legal aid is given to bridge gap between poor and rich, and no one departs from legal advice, and it does not stop anyone from getting justice, even if you are poor or socially or economically backward. Then the first part of this chapter talks about the legal background. So it talks about like in a participatory democracy. So here, participatory democracy. So what is the meaning of this? So as we all know, democracy means when the people are the ones who choose their representatives in a country. So participatory democracy is nothing but democracy in which the people participate to choose their representatives. So, in this type of democracy, it is essential that citizens have a faith in their judicial institutions. So, it ensures that appropriate representation in the court of law and settles the need for equality principle. So, an impartial and independent judiciary is the guardian of individual rights in a democratic society. So, as we all know, we have three organs in our government. If we talk about India, we have legislature, we have executive, and we have judiciary. So it is very important that all these three organs have their own functions and they perform their functions adequately, and they are separate from each other in ways. See, like it shouldn't be that a decision that is taken by the judiciary is criticized by the legislature or the executive, right? They should be an independent stand for all the three organs. So as we all know, in our country the judiciary is independent. That is why it's called as independent judiciary. So the judiciary should be independent, it should be impartial. Like when it is setting the main purpose of judiciary is setting up of disputes, settling the disputes what are there. So it's very important that the judiciary is neutral, and uh, it should be adequate in providing the remedies, and it should be impartial. There should be no partiality while the decisions or the judgments are taken. So, the judiciary of a country is a guardian of the individual rights in a democratic society. Citizens should have faith in their court system, and all the people must have access to the courts whenever it's necessary. So, making arrangements to ensure adequate representation, etc. So then this if we have to write about the summary of the first paragraph in short, it you can write it as, in a democratic country people have more power. When people have more power, what do we achieve? When people have more power, we get more direct influence in the government, directly participating by representing the whole. So judiciary, it plays a very important role, and it has no influence from other government, other organ of the government whatsoever. So without any political pressure, it acts neutral, it settles the case in an amicable way, means in a peaceful way. So this is the summary of our first paragraph. Then second paragraph talks about that citizens agree to a limitation on their freedom in exchange for peaceful coexistence. Limitation on their freedom means that, see, everyone in a country is like, not in a country, as a person, we consider ourselves to be free, right? We free of control. But when you come in a democratic country, we agree to limitation on freedom, right? Because a part of our freedom we are giving in the hands of government, who is controlling us indirectly. So just in that way, we do that for a peaceful coexistence in the country. And the citizens, they expect that when conflict between a citizen or between the state and citizens arise, there is a place that is independent of undue influence. This is where we are talking about the courts or the judicial system in our country, which is trustworthy and that has an authority over all the parties to solve the disputes peacefully. So the state has to, the responsibility of the state is to ensure that there is fair and impartial justice, and is made at the doorstep of a poor and economically weaker section. Because if there is no legal aid provided, it would be very very tough, very very hard for the socially economically backward classes of a country to, get the equal representation which they should ideally be getting. So legal aid helps to bridge that gap. So irrespective of their caste, creed, religion, geographical position, free of cost basically. So again, the second paragraph is talking about that judiciary should act impartially so that justice is given. If you come under poor or economically weaker class, you will also be given free legal aid, and the state should ensure that there is every step is being followed properly in a very systematic manner. Okay, next is basically okay. Um, the fundamental value of the Indian system of justice is that the stability of our society depends on ability of the people to readily obtain access to courts. So of course, for if we talk about the system of justice in India, stability of our society means how stable the society maintains, how balanced our society is. It depends upon the ability of the people. After all, in a democratic country, wherever we want to see developments, or wherever we want to see a change, everything is in the hands of people. Okay, so be it for the good or be it for any other reason. So the ability of the people to readily obtain access to court, because the court system is the mechanism which is recognized and accepted by all to peacefully resolve disputes. So, denying access to court forces dispute resolution into other arenas and results in violence. So, of course, if a person is denied justice by the court, there are a lot of other things that might happen within the countries. For example, civil wars within the country. Like we see a lot of countries where civil war has arisen because the court system wasn't, it was insufficient to fulfill the needs of a society. So it is very important that the court is very systematic and the disputes are handled in a very peaceful, in a very vigilant manner. So here we can also see one example where, like, in which if there are two parties A and B, and suppose it's a civil case, and A says in my area B has constructed something else, so A will file. Suppose A had a plot, okay, in that plot B has constructed something else, okay. So A files a case through a lawyer, okay. Then the lawyer will file a patent statement, and B will have to come to the court after they call her. Suppose B doesn't know that A has already filed a case against B. Okay, B doesn't know. As soon as the lawyer the lawyer which has been appointed by A files a patent statement, B will have to come to the court after they call, and then eventually B will also hire an advocate and they give reply back to the reply they reply back to the court according to what all statement that is held by A, and this is called as written statement, and this is called as pleadings in the court. Further on in the chapter we'll talk more about it, just a gist. Okay. So then Okay, the Indian legal system. So here they've talked about how the Indian legal system evolved. So it is it is a adversarial system. Okay, the Supreme Court. Yeah, okay, so basically this paragraph talks about that our constitution was framed from different countries, as we have already seen in class 11 as well. If we saw fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy, we saw those were extracts from the different constitutions of all around the world. Like we have borrowed our directive principles from Ireland. Same with all different things were borrowed from all around the world. So basically they talk about that our constitution, we follow the Anglo-American model in dispensing justice, and advocate will provide arguments and will provide justice accordingly. So it is therefore that it is an adversarial system. The poor are represented by the advocates appointed by government to ensure equal representation in court of law, which forms one of the most important facets of the true democracy. So the basic essence of democracy, if we connect it with judiciary or judicial system, is that everyone is given equal opportunity, everyone is given equal representation. So this is one of a very important fact that our democracy is fulfilling, especially in India. So the advocate or the judge, they play a very vital role in collecting the evidences, and judges will decide upon their decisions also. Then next topic talks about legal aid under the Indian Constitution. This is something that is very important because here we see a lot of different acts, a lot of different articles that are there, which we few of them we have seen in class 11, few of them might be new. So first they talk about the Constitution Amendment Act. In this, the important thing to note is that it was the 42nd amendment, and it was inserted in the year 1976 in, and it was inserted under article 39A. So it can come as a MCQ or whatsoever it can come as. So article 39A basically talks about equal justice and free legal aid. This is something that is important to know, that it can come as a MCQ, that which article talks about equal justice and free legal aid. So you have to write the entire thing. The Constitution in the 42nd Amendment Act 1976 inserted Article 39A, which talks about equal justice and free legal aid. So, as we already know what legal aid is, that it ensures that opportunities for securing justice are not denied to any citizen, even if they're economically or socially backward. Okay, then the wording of Article 39A repeats that kind of equality which shall promote access to justice for all by creating equal opportunity. So this is what I just mentioned, that everyone should be given equal opportunity and access to the judicial system in our country. So only a fair procedure can ensure the concept of equality and access to justice. Okay, then we talk about two more articles which are very known. As a law student, everyone knows about these two articles, very common. First is Article 15, which talks about discrimination, and then we have Article 14, which talks about equality before law. So, Article 15 of the Constitution of India, the state shall not discriminate against any citizens on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. Alright, then Article 14 of the Constitution of India provides that the state shall not deny to any person equality before law or the equal protection of the law within territory of India. Okay, so Why have they written, why have they mentioned article 15 and 14 here? What is the purpose of mentioning? Because we were talking about article 39A. Why have they mentioned 15 and 14? This is because no one should be deprived of free legal aid. So these both articles also connect to the fact of free legal aid. Okay. Next, we talk about free legal aid under criminal law. So, in class 11, we saw one topic which was the Code of Criminal Procedure in 1898. It's a bit more we talk about it in this chapter, connecting it with free legal aid. So, section 340, clause 1 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1898 provided that if a man was charged with an offense that is punishable with death, the court could provide him with counsel upon his request. So, suppose a person has committed a heinous crime, right? Heinous crime in which it's a cognizable offense, right? Of course, you will be jailed for more than 3 years, and according to the offense that you have committed, your sentence gets announced. Suppose that person has committed a very grave crime and he is charged or he is punishable with death. So, in that case, if the person wishes to do, the court could provide him with counsel. Okay, so this was under section 340, clause 1 of the Code of Civil Criminal Procedure. So, however, there was an amendment in the same procedure, the Code of Criminal Procedure, 1973. It was amended and it facilitated the statutory implementation of free legal aid. So, Section 304, Clause 1 of CRPC provides that in a trial before the sessions judge, of course, sessions judge is usually seen always in criminal cases. So, if the accused does not have sufficient means to engage a pleader, the court should assign a pleader for his defense at the expense of the state. It basically means in criminal case, once arrested, presented before the magistrate, these are the procedures. First scenario, there are two scenarios. First scenario is if a person is charged with punishment of death, they can request the court for a counsel to defend for that particular case, right? Second scenario is now after the amendment came in 1973, any sort of punishment, any category, even if you are not punishable with death, any category, if they get to know that we have insufficient means, suppose I have insufficient funds, I don't have sufficient means, they will themselves, who is they? The court will themselves appoint the council, and the expenses have to be paid by the government, by the state government, uh, as per the respective state that the accused belongs to. So this is what was the amendment that we saw before. In the section 340, clause 1, what happened was that if a person is charged with punishment of death, they have to request the court for counsel to defend for a particular case. Now in the second scenario, in the amendment, two things were changed. First, any sort of punishment. Second, that they themselves will appoint counsel. You don't have to go and request the court. Themselves, they will appoint your counsel if they feel, or if they get to know that you have a insufficient means and you cannot provide for yourself. This was what was the free legal aid under criminal law. Next was free legal aid under international law. So basically, international law addresses the provision for free legal aid. So before, like previously, we have been talking about free legal aid mainly India. Everywhere we're talking about Indian legal system, etc. Now we're talking about international law. So international law also addresses provisions of free legal aid from the perspective of human rights. So there's an explicit provision for legal services. So it has been incorporated in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Then India has also accepted the International Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights, which came into force in 1976. So this, what the ICCPR that was taken out by international law, had also been accepted by India in 1976. So the Indian Supreme Court has adopted the method of giving effect to international legal obligation When these obligations exist in Indian legal system expressly, the court also recognized international legal obligation as part of law on the land when Indian law can harmlessly interpreted as in conformity with international law. Basically, the meaning in short and concise and easily, if you have to explain this paragraph, it means whenever the legislature makes laws, they should make law in hand with the international laws. See, in our country, we have three organs, as I told you. Among that, legislature is that organ that makes laws. It makes the laws. So, whenever legislation makes the laws, it should make laws which go hand in hand with the international laws and the treaties so that harmony can be maintained. Simple. They have given a lot of different wordings here that might be confusing. So, the simplified way is this, that legislation should go hand in hand with the international laws and treaties so that harmony can be maintained. Okay, so there are a number of international treaties. We have seen this in class 11 also. They have given, these are examples of international treaties that the legislation should keep hand in hand while framing laws. Like you have your International Convent on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Then you have CEDA, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Then you even have your International Convention on Elimination of all the forms of racial discrimination. So these three types of treaties they have given you as examples. Then they have given you here. Okay, so this paragraph, in short, this is exactly talking, this summary that is in red talks about this paragraph. So UDHR, now what is UDHR? It basically stands for Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this talks about, this comes under Article 8. Article 8 provides that everyone has the right to an effective remedy if your fundamental rights are violated. You have the right to file up a case to seek justice by going to the court or the tribunal. It is considered to be a soft law, not having any effect, not equivalent to the law enacted by legislation. Some exceptions are there, like electing up of new members. Okay. Um Okay, so a very simple meaning of this, again, UDHR stands for Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in this Article 8 was where UDHR was mentioned. What it means basically, if a person, suppose my fundamental rights are getting violated. Fundamental rights are those rights which are alienable, non-alienable. You can, the country cannot, they cannot barry for giving you those rights. Those are some basic rights. So these rights, suppose my fundamental right gets violated, so in that case, I can go to a court or a tribunal. It is considered to be a soft law, not having effect, not equivalent to the law enacted by the legislature. Of course, if a law is enacted by a legislature, it is considered to be important. It is considered to be something that is mandatory. It should be followed by all the citizens. But these, if your fundamental rights are violated and you go to a court, these laws that are enacted, they are not as implementing on others also in the country. So they don't have the same, they're not equivalent to the laws that are enacted by the legislature. Okay, and there are some exceptions that are there, not mentioned here. This is just a sense that they have given you of UDHR. Next thing that we see is Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. This is an important question. It's a three marker. It can come as a three marker. It has been several times, it has been asked in the board also. And it's an important question. Uh, okay, so I've given a very a beautiful explanation of this also, so it will be very easy to understand. Okay, so the 14th Law Commission. Okay, instead of reading this, I have made a very concise summary of this, which has all the important points. I'll be sharing that. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this was the brief history. So in 1958, a lot of dates are mentioned here. Of course, they're important. It shouldn't be avoided. You should not skip any dates, especially in a subject like legal studies. Dates are important. They're very interconnected dates, like we see 58, then 60, 73. It's going in a sequence, so it's important to learn the dates as well. So, okay, so first date that we see is 1958. So, this was when the Law Commission of India said that poor people should get free legal help from the government. It said lawyers should help run legal aid programs and the government should pay for the lawyers for poor people in criminal cases, appeals, and even in jails. Okay, so this was there was the Law Commission of India. The 14th report was there, in which in 1958 they mentioned that for poor people they should be provided with free legal help from the government, right? Of course, if there is, in both civil and criminal matters, both the cases, when we see, whenever a dispute or a case arises, of course the person, the party affected, you should be able to hire a lawyer or advocate, whatever you call it. So it is very important that the lawyer should be there. It is very important, right? So that equal justice is given, right? So sometimes it happens that the person who is affected by who is affected and who is filing up the case does not have insufficient funds, lacks the funds, and is not able to hire a lawyer or an advocate to run the case. So in that case, they should be provided with free legal help from the government. So the government should provide them with lawyers, and of course the government will pay for the lawyers. So this was what we saw in 1958. Next date that we see was in 1960. The central government started something which was called the National Legal Aid Scheme, but it did not have enough money, so it slowly stopped working. So they have not given a lot of information about this. They just told us that the central government started the National Legal Aid Scheme, but because of insufficient monetary funds, it slowly stopped working. Okay, then the third date that we see was in the year 1973. The government tried again. Of course, after 1960, the government didn't stop. They tried again, and there was a committee which was formed under Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer to create a better legal aid plan for the states. Of course, our country had yearned for legal aid throughout the years that came by. Everyone in the sense, all the citizens were very provoked to have free legal aid in a country, so that it can bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. So it was very important for our country, especially a country like India with such a vast population and diversity, to have such provisions given, such amenities given to the population, to the citizens of the country. So again, there was a committee which was formed under Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, important name, and this committee was formed to have a better legal aid plan for the states. So this plan suggested that legal aid committees should be set up at district level, state level, and national level. So according to this plan, it suggested that these legal aid committees should be set up in your district level, state level, and even at national level. Then in 1980, we saw another national committee which was formed under Justice P.N. Bhagwati. Again, important name. So it was another committee was formed, and P.N. Bhagwati at that time was also the judge of the Supreme Court of India. Important thing to mention, to remember. And this committee was called the CILAS, which stands for Committee for Implementing Legal Aid Schemes. So this committee, the basic aim was it checked and supervised legal aid programs across the country. Now, of course, the legal aid programs have been implemented, but we need a body, we need some type of committee that actually stands as a watchdog and keeps an eye on if how it's being performed all across the country. So this was why the SILAS was formed basically in 1980. Then later on, after 7 years, we saw the Legal Services Authorities Act 1987 was passed. This law officially made free legal aid. So after so long time, it was started in 1958 was when it the struggle to implement this free legal aid started, and finally in 1987 this Legal Service Authority Act was finally passed, and this law officially made free legal aid a proper legal right, and they provided free legal help to certain categories of people all over India, like SC, ST, uh, other classes, of course, the backward classes, OBCs, etc. So, the Legal Service Authority Act 1987 says that special legal service authorities will be created to give free and proper legal help to weaker sections of society. And the main aim was again that no person should be denied or deprived of justice just because they're poor or they're disabled or they're financially weak. So it also says that the Lok Adalats will be organized. Lok Adalats is nothing but the people's court. Okay, so Lok Adalats are the people court where disputes are settled through mutual agreement in a peaceful and a friendly way. They provide an extra platform for people to solve their disputes quickly and cheaply, right? Because going to the court is not just, it's not just time consuming, but it can also prove to be expensive because hiring lawyers and paying the fees, it adds up and it's quite expensive. The end is quite expensive. So these Lok Adalats were a very cheap and a non time consuming type of organization, and you we they were in long queues, etc., so without going through long court procedures. So the idea behind this law is that society is changing and developing fast. Because of social economic differences, some people are still weak and disadvantaged, right? So this act tries to protect people and make sure that poverty, disability, or inequality does not stop anyone from getting justice. Okay, in short, the act ensures equal opportunity for justice for all the citizens, especially for the weaker sections of the society. So, this is a brief explanation of the history of how our free legal aid was enacted in our country. So again, over here, there has been an example that is given. There was a word of two words that were used in while explaining Lok Adalats. That was the conciliatory settlement. Now, what does this mean? Conciliatory settlement. Basically, let's take an example. If there are two people, A and B, they enter into agreement. Okay, they enter into agreement, and suppose A drafts five terms, terms and conditions are laid down. A drafts five terms and conditions, but the second person B, he or she agrees to only the first two. Okay, first two terms he or she agrees, but he or she disagrees with the last three terms and conditions. So obviously, if B is disagreeing with some three of the terms and condition, a dispute will arise, of course. Because there is no full agreement on all the terms, the matter needs to be resolved. So instead of going directly to the court, which can take long time and it involves high cost, A and B can choose an alternative dispute resolution mechanism, which is called as ADR. So in ADR, both parties appoint a neutral third person to help settle the dispute. Okay, if they choose arbitration, the neutral third party is called an arbitrator. Decision given by arbitrator is legally binding and it has the exact same effect as that as a court judgment. The purpose of ADR is to provide you with faster, less expensive, and a more convenient way to resolve disputes without going into lengthy judicial process, going to the court. It will take so much time. It might even take several years. It involves high cost. You're avoiding all of that. Less expensive, cheaper, etc. So this was just the explanation of conciliatory settlement. It's not been mentioned anywhere, but it might come in some of the other chapters in this book. So that's why I just meaning of what this word means. Next topic is entitlement of legal services. Very important question. It can come as a 5 marker. It's extremely important. So the section 12 and 13 of the Legal Service Authority Act. This is very important. Section 12 and 13 of the Legal Service Authority Act deals with the criteria for eligibility for legal services. Okay, so basically, throughout what we have been seeing is that a person who is socially, economically backward, or a person who has insufficient funds is a person who is entitled to getting free legal aid. But while framing a law, when a law is framed, you have to give the broader prospects, right? You have the government has to detail everything, that who will be getting free legal services, what all categories will be getting. So this is exactly what was mentioned in section 12 and 13 of the act. Okay, so section 12 was the criteria for giving legal services. Every person who has to file or defend a case will be entitled to free legal services under this act if he or she is a person of these categories they have given us. Okay, first is if the person or a member is part of SC or ST, scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. Second is a victim of trafficking in human beings or is a beggar, as referred in Article 23 of Constitution. Third is a woman or a child. Fourth is a person who is disabled. Okay, fifth is a person under circumstances of under reserved. Okay, people who are victim of mass disaster, suppose in a country, natural, because of natural calamities such as flood, drought, earthquake, etc. So even those people can get the facility of free legal aid. Sixth is an industrial workman. Then seventh is in custody of protective home, like we know juvenile home, we have studied it in class 11. Okay, or a psychiatric hospital or psychiatric nursing home. These three are given in custody of protective home, first thing. Second is juvenile home. Third is psychiatric hospital or psychiatric nursing home. Okay, last point is in receipt of annual income less than rupees 9,000 as prescribed by state government, or Supreme Court states that the is less than rupees 12,000. Annual income is less than rupees 12,000. State government states that if annual income is less than rupees 9,000, Supreme Court suggests that if annual income is less than rupees 12,000. Okay, okay, so these are the categories which are entitled to eligibility for the legal services. Next thing they have given in a small box: senior citizens eligibility for free legal aid depends on the rules framed by respective states. So, an important thing to note here is that every state has different measures for free legal aid. Okay, though there is uniformity in the process, but certain categories have different rules framed by respective states. So one of these categories, senior citizens. So the rule for the free legal aid, it depends on the rule that is framed by the respective state government in this regard. In Delhi, suppose they have given you example like as Delhi. So in Delhi, for example, a senior citizen is eligible for free legal aid subject to the prescribed ceiling of annual income, right, that we saw over here. And any individual who is above the age of 60 can apply for free legal aid services. Okay, this is just one example of one state, that is Delhi. Now in across India, there are a lot of different states, so 28 states, so they also have their different rules that are framed by them. Okay, next topic is legal services meaning and types. Okay, so the first we talk about the free legal services include. So what are the procedures that you need to follow to get the free legal aid service? So the first is payment of court fees, process fees, and all other charges payable. You have to pay the court fees. Second is providing service of lawyers in legal proceedings. Then you have to obtain and supply of certified copies and other documents. There are some documents with government, right? Some documents are there with the government. Maybe we need those for our legal proceedings. We need those for registration. So for that also we have to request the government to provide us with those documents so that we can further proceed with the further steps, so that we can get our legal proceedings at the earliest. Last is preparation of appeal. Okay, that also has to be made. So litigation is not a luxury, but it should be used as a last resort. Okay, litigation is not a luxury, it's not at all a luxury, but it should be used as a last resort. In criminal cases, prosecution is initiated by the state. And when legal aid is provided to accuse, expenditure of both the parties is managed by state. So see, it shouldn't be thought of like, oh, I am socially economically backward, I belong to SC ST, litigation is a luxury for me, I can get free legal aid, everything can be, all my funds are, have to be, uh, have to stand on the weight of the state or of the government, all the funds are to be paid by them, it's a luxury for me. No, it shouldn't be considered as a luxury, but it is used as a last resort. Okay, because see, in criminal cases the prosecution is initiated by the state, obviously we know this. So when legal aid is provided to accused, expenditure of both the parties is managed by states. Sometimes it is criticized that legal aid in criminal cases encourages litigation. Therefore, pre-litigation services were introduced, okay, as a category of legal services provided to eligible people. So sometimes it was noted that in legal aid in the criminal cases, it encourages litigation. So in that, because of that, your pre-litigation services was also introduced as a category of legal services. Okay, so these are basically the types of legal services that we are going to see. Free legal services also includes provision of aid, advice to beneficiaries, access to benefit under the welfare statutes and schemes framed by central government. So it's a lot of benefits that have been given to the people. Okay. Okay. Now we see legal services are broadly classified or categorized in two types. First, we have pre litigation legal services. Second, we have post litigation legal services. So, first, we're going to see pre litigation legal services. Basically, these days the number of litigations is increasing day by day. Day by day, we see there's so many litigations that come across in the court, so which is against the smooth administration of justice, right? Because even though the matter is not of, not of national concern or might not be that big, still people come up in the court and file litigations for unnecessary reasons, which goes against the smooth flowing of the justice administration of justice. So far emphasis was given only to post litigation assistance or help, right? But now it has been realized that pre litigation service is also more useful, it is way much more useful than post litigation legal services. What does pre litigation legal service includes? First, legal education. Second, legal advice. Third, legal awareness. Fourth, pre litigation settlement. Legal education, legal advice, legal awareness, pre litigation settlement. So the society basically criticizes that criminal cases needs litigation. A lot of pending cases are there. So to avoid that, they adopted pre litigation legal services, right? So, post litigation service includes that services that are required to be rendered by advocate to his client. So, once litigation has started, those services that are required to be rendered by advocate to his client is basically post litigation services after the litigation has started. Okay, so this is the difference between pre litigation, post litigation. Pre means before litigation has started. Post litigation means after the litigation has been enacted or has started. Okay, next topic that we are going to see is extremely important. It is National Legal Services Authority, which we also call it as NALSA, National Legal Services Authority. So, as per Article 39A of the Constitution of India, without seeing Article 39A, everyone should know what it is by now. What does Article 39A mean? Please write it down in the comment box. Um, I hope everyone knows what it means by now because this is very important. This article is the basis on which this chapter revolves. It means to provide equality and free legal aid, right, for the weaker sections of society and to ensure justice for all. Now, Article 14, we already saw equality before law. 22 Clause A. Now, what is that? 22 Clause A means to promote justice based on equal opportunity for all. Everyone in a country should be given equal opportunity whatsoever, be it in the field of work, education, anything. They should be given equal opportunity. So constitution also makes it obligatory for the state to ensure equality, means the constitution makes it mandatory that the state has to ensure equality before the law and a legal system that promotes justice on the basis of equal opportunity for all. So in the year 1987, as we already saw, the Legal Service Authority Act was enacted by the Parliament, and this came into force on 9th November 1995. So the Legal Service Authority Act, it was enacted in the year 1987, but when did it come in force? 1995. Another important thing to note. When did was it enacted? 1987. When did it come into force? 1995. Okay. So again, Legal Service Authority Act, we have already seen it was to provide free legal services to the weaker sections of society on the basis of equal opportunity. Then the National Legal Service Authority had started. So, what was this? It had been constituted under the Legal Service Authority Act 1987 to monitor and evaluate the implementation of legal aid programs. I already have explained you that implementing a thing is one stage, but monitoring it, evaluating the functionality or the efficiency of that is also one important stage. So this is where National Legal Service Authority played its role. It helped to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the legal aid programs, and it also laid down policies and principles for making legal services available under the act. Okay, so in every state there was a state legal service authority, and in every high court there was a high court legal service committee. Okay, in short, I have given you here because here they have just made it into a paragraph and might be a bit difficult to understand or learn. In state, we had the state legal service authority, high court legal service committee, district level district legal service authority, taluk level taluk legal service. So this is the flow how it goes: state, high court, district, taluk. So the Supreme Court Legal Service Committee has been constituted to administer and implement the legal service program in so far as it relates to Supreme Court of India. Okay, so this was about the National Legal Services Authority Act. Okay, then it talks about what the NALSA lays down, the policies, principles. It lays down the policies, principles, and guidelines, and it also frames effective economic schemes for the state legal service authorities to implement the legal services program throughout the country. So primarily the state legal service authority, district legal service authority, and the taluk legal service committees have been asked to discharge the following main functions on regular basis. First is to provide free and competent legal services to eligible persons. Eligible persons are those who come under Section 12 of the Legal Service Authority Act, as we have seen, like women and children, SC, ST, people, person with disability, all that we saw there. They are eligible for free and competent legal services. Second is to organize lok adalats, people court, for amicable settlement of disputes, peaceful settlement of disputes. Third is organize legal awareness camps in rural areas. So these are the main three functions of your state, district, and taluk level organizations. Next, we are going to see the NALSA regulations 2010. Okay, so in 2010, the National Legal Service Authority of India adopted the National Legal Service Authority, which was the free and competent legal service regulation in the exercise of its power under Section 29 of Legal Service Authority Act 1987. Okay, so the regulations were applicable to the legal service committees of the Supreme Court, High Court, State, District, and Taluks. So these were the broad features of the relevant regulations. First was the selection of panel lawyers. Second was payment of fees. Third was senior advocates. So first is selection of panel lawyers. How is the selection of panel lawyers done? Legal Services Institution is vested with authority to invite applications from legal practitioners with requisite professional experience. So it is whenever a legal service institution is formed, it is vested with authority, means it has the authority to invite people who are already practicing in the field of legal and who have a professional expertise to indicate the type of cases as they are entrusted with. Suppose there are people who are dealing in company law or criminal laws or civil law cases who have professional expertise in that. So these legal services institution, they invite these type of people. Okay, so the panel shall be prepared by the executive chairman of legal services. Important. This panel is prepared by the executive chairman of legal services institution in the consultation with the attorney general for Supreme Court, advocate general for High Court, government pleader for district or taluk, and Bar Association President. Again, the panel is prepared by the executive chairman for the legal service institution in the consultation of attorney general for Supreme Court, advocate general for High Court, government pleader for district or taluk level, and Bar Association President. The legal practitioners shall have 3 years or more of experience at the bar. Only if the person who has legal expertise has experience of more than 3 years, has to have experience of more than 3 years at the bar for being considered for this for being considered to be selected for the panel lawyers. So personal traits should be there, like competence, integrity, suitability, experience shall be considered also. So qualitative characteristics are also considered. Separate panels are maintained for different type of cases, of course, right? For civil, criminal, different panels are kept. Regulations also provide for retainer lawyers. Panel has to be constituted every 3 years without disturbing the work of panel lawyers already representing ongoing cases. In such cases where the panel lawyer wishes to withdraw from a case entrusted to him, shall communicate this to the member secretary, and the latter may permit him to do so. So basically, the panel has to be formed every 3 years without disturbing the work of panel lawyers. So the lawyers who are in the panel, they are dealing with day to day cases, right? So and the panel also has to be formed every 3 years. So when this panel is getting formed, it should make sure that it doesn't disturb the work of the panel lawyers who are already working with their ongoing cases. And in such cases where, if suppose a panel lawyer, if they wish to withdraw from a case, and which has been given to him or her, they don't want to do that, they don't want to continue with that case, they can do so. They can communicate this to the member secretary, and the panel lawyer may permit him to do so. Okay, sorry, the member secretary may permit him to do so. Okay, then the panel lawyer can withdraw accordingly. The panel lawyer is barred from taking any fee, remuneration, or other valuable consideration from any person for whom legal service is rendered under the regulation or act. See, suppose I am the one who I'm a person who comes under section 12 of the Legal Service Act, okay, 1987. I come under that. I come under a person who is coming under the category of scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. Okay, and I have been appointed a panel lawyer. Okay, after during the case, I decide, maybe, as a, we call it as a tip or as a fee, and small fee. I decide, okay, I give him a small fee. Usually for legal aid that is provided, I should be getting free legal aid, but just for the sake, I decide to give some small fee to my panel lawyer, or any other remuneration or valuable consideration. So the panel lawyer is not at all in the position to accept that fees. Okay, they cannot accept that fees or remuneration or anything that is given by me. Okay, under the regulation or the act. Okay, panel lawyer may be withdrawn from a case or his name removed from the panel on account of non-performance of duty. So of course, where there is advantage, there is disadvantage also. If a panel lawyer is not performing good, or his duties are not to the nature of satisfaction, okay, or his actions are against the object and purpose of the regulation, then the panel lawyer is withdrawn from the case. He or she can be taken out or removed from that particular case. Second is payment of fees. The regulations specify the rules regarding payment of fees for panel lawyers, which shall be in accordance with state regulation without any delay on receipt of completion of proceeding for them. So, of course, the fees has already been decided by according to the state regulation without any delay. Okay, and it suggests that a periodic revision of the different types of services provided by panel lawyers in legal aid cases should be done, right? Third and the last is senior advocates. The service of senior advocates may be availed if the chairman of legal service institution forms an opinion to that effect in case of great public importance. Now, an important point to note here is that there are some cases or some disputes that arise, that are not just important to a very small group of people, but it is of great importance to the public. It affects the entire society or nation as a whole. So in that case, the service of the senior advocates are also availed. And even if they feel that there is a serious threat to the life and liberty of the applicant exists, there the service of a senior advocate will also can also be availed, because of course more expertise, professional expertise, more experience is there in the hand of senior advocate. So wherever it is felt that we need the help or we need advice, opinion of senior advocate, it can also be taken. Okay, if the chairman wishes to do so, if the case is of great public importance, or where there is a serious threat to the life and liberty of the applicant. Okay, so this was the NALSA regulations 2010. Next is the Legal Service Authority Amendment Act 2002. So this Legal Service Authority Act, it got amended in 2002. Okay, the Parliament of India realized that litigation oriented legal service cannot bring out desired results. So previously we had seen pre litigation, post litigation, right? Then with the ongoing of time, the Parliament of India realized that these litigation oriented services cannot bring desired results. Therefore, for encouraging pre litigation legal service, especially in the public utility service, the Parliament made certain amendment in the Legal Service Authority Act by passing an act known as Legal Service Authority Amendment Act 2002. The purpose of this amendment is to bring out certain changes in the Legal Service Act 1987. The first purpose of the amendment was to establishment of permanent lok adalats to settle disputes concerning public utility services at pre-litigation state. Second, and the most important purpose of this amendment was pre-litigation conciliation and settlement pertaining to public utility services. This was what I explained you here in this example that was given to you here, where litigation was explained. This is where we understood the meaning of conciliatory statement. This is what we are seeing over here. So basically, this is what we were seeing, why the Legal Service Authority Act 1987 got amended in 2002. First was because to establish permanent lok adalat. Second was pre-litigation conciliation and settlement pertaining to public utility services. Okay, public. Okay, now what is public utility service? Everywhere in the chapter, you must be seeing this phrase public utility service. What does it mean? So, public utility service means any first point, transport service for the carriage of passengers or good by air, road, or water. Second, postal telegraph or telephone service. Third, supply of power, light, water to public. Fourth, system of public conservancy or sanitization, hygiene basically. Fifth is service in hospital or dispensary. Sixth is insurance service and includes any service which the central government or state government, as the case may be, may in the public interest by notification declare to be the public utility service. Okay, so these were the main points that comprised of public utility service. Okay, everything that involves public in day-to-day life was comprised under this. Okay, then we have permanent lok adalat important provisions, and when can legal aid be denied or withdrawn? Legal aid. Okay, so we have just three more important topics left. First one is the permanent lok adalat important provision. So as we saw in the Legal Service Amendment Act 2002, it was the first feature that was seen for the amendment was permanent lok adalat. So what were the important provisions of this? That is what we are going to see in these five points that are given here. First was the permanent lok adalat shall, during conduct or conciliation proceeding, assist the parties in their attempt to reach an amicable settlement. So basically, the main, see, lok adalat means people's court. I've already explained you before that lok adalat, how is it different from a general court, is because it is cheaper, it is more, the it is the time taken to settle the dispute is less. So the main reason for the lok adalat was to assist the parties in their attempt to reach in an amicable settlement of their dispute in a peaceful, so that the dispute can be settled in a peaceful way. Okay, and in an independent, impartial manner. Second was, it shall be the duty of every party to the application to cooperate in good faith with the permanent lok adalat and to comply with the direction of the permanent lok adalat to produce evidence and other related documents, even though it is not in as position, not it's not in the situation as the Supreme Court. You cannot compare the lok adalat with Supreme Court, right? Even though it is, you cannot compare it with the Supreme Court, still you must, a person, the applicant should provide all the material evidences and other documents that are required before you go ahead with this. Okay, it is the duty of every party to the application to cooperate with the permanent lok adalat. You should cooperate with this body. Okay. Third is, in case the parties reach at an agreement on the settlement of dispute, they shall sign the settlement agreement and the permanent lok adalat shall pass an award in terms thereof. So suppose there is a conflict between two people and eventually they go to lok adalat, everything happens, all the evidences are laid down, and in the end they reach an agreement on settlement of dispute. So in that case they have to sign the settlement agreement, and this lok adalat also has to pass an award. Okay, where the parties fail to reach an agreement, the permanent lok adalat shall decide the dispute. So again, lok adalat can also be called as a neutral third party. So if the parties, suppose they fail to reach at an agreement, there are two parties, they are not able to reach to agreement. So in that case, your lok adalat will decide the dispute according to the evidences that have been laid down by both the parties. Then fourth point is procedure of permanent lok adalat. The permanent lok adalat shall, while conducting conciliation proceeding or deciding a dispute under this act, be guided by the principles of natural justice. So we have already seen principles of natural justice that we already saw Nemo Judex and Casus Sua in class 11. We already saw this, and we also saw bias in the judge should not be biased in a case. So The permanent lok adalat, this act is also guided by principles of natural justice and objectivity, fair play, equity, other principles of justice, and shall not be bound by the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 and the Indian Evidence Act 1872. Okay. Fifth point is the award of permanent lok adalat shall be final and deemed to be a degree of civil court. So award basically when the two parties reach to settlement, right? As we saw over here, when they agree on the settlement of dispute, the lok adalat passes an award. So this award that the lok adalat has passed is final. It cannot be changed, and it has to be deemed to a degree of a civil court. Means it is in means that whatever judgment has been taken by the lok adalat has to be is given the position of that judgment that is taken by the civil court. Same position is given to both the judgments, right? It has the position of that of a judgment of a civil court. Okay. Then there are a few other judgment initiatives also, like we see the legal service mobile app. So to ensure equitable access to justice, the NALSA has also launched the legal service mobile app on the Android and iOS versions to enable easy access to legal aid to common citizens. And then there has been the DISHA scheme, which is the Department of Justice has launched a comprehensive, holistic, integrated, and systematic solution on access to justice at pan India level, means all across India, through a scheme titled as Designing Innovative Solutions for Holistic Access to Justice, being implemented from 2021 to 26. Okay. Then we see the all access to justice programs that have merged under the DISHA scheme and upscaled to all India level. So these were some of the other initiatives that had also been taken. Like we saw over here, the amendment focused on these two purposes because of which the act was amended. But then we see other initiatives also that were enacted. Then we have okay, then we have the second last topic of this chapter: when can legal aid be denied or withdrawn? Okay, so throughout this chapter we have been seeing that the government has to bear all the expense, the state has to bear the expense, everything, etc., etc. But when can the legal aid actually be denied or withdrawn? Right, legal aid can be denied at the initial stage before the application for legal aid is accepted. Right, so before the suppose I'm an applicant, I apply for legal aid. At that point, when the application is filed, at that point, the initial stage only, it can be denied. This is when it can be denied means when you have applied for it and you are not given it, like you have been denied for it. Withdrawn means you applied for it, they accepted it, and further on they withdrew it from you, they took that from you. Then it can also be withdrawn at the later stage after the application has been accepted. Legal aid can be denied or withdrawn in the following circumstances. So, in these seven circumstances, the legal aid can be denied or withdrawn. First is legal aid can be denied if a person is found ineligible under Section 12 of Legal Service Authority Act 1987. We have already seen this in depth. Second is legal aid can be withdrawn if the aided person who applied under the income category is found to possess insufficient means. We already saw this as well. Like we saw over here that the annual income should be less than rupees 9,000 in the case of state government, and the annual income should be less than rupees 12,000 case of Supreme Court. So if the person is found with sufficient means, then the legal aid can be denied to that person or can be withdrawn. Then, third is legal aid can be withdrawn when the aided person obtained legal services by misrepresentation or fraud. Suppose, uh, just because they wanted to get free service, they obtained it by fraud, by something that is not, uh, not by legal methods. It is something that is provided by fake information, maybe fake details have been provided. Okay. Fourth is legal aid can be withdrawn when the aided person does not cooperate with the legal service authority or committee or with the legal service advocate. If you're not cooperating, then also it can be denied or withdrawn. Legal aid can be withdrawn when the person engages a legal practitioner other than the one assigned by the legal service committee. So as we already know that when you are eligible under the legal service act, when you're getting provided with the free legal aid, at that time the committee itself provides you with a advocate or a lawyer. Apart from that, if a person is engaging with a separate personal legal practitioner, then your legal aid can be withdrawn. Sixth is legal aid can be withdrawn in the event of death or of the aided person, except in the case of civil proceeding where the right or liability survives. Okay, and the seventh and uh, last point wherein legal aid can be denied is where the application for legal service or matter in question is found to be an abuse of the process of law or legal services. Okay, so legal aid can also be withdrawn where the application for legal service or matter in question is found to be an abuse in process of law or in legal services. So these are the seven main points under which aid can be denied or withdrawn. Then we come to the last point of this chapter, last topic of this chapter, legal aid in context of social justice and human rights. So it's in this topic is a conclusion to this chapter, or you can say it's like a gist to the ending of this chapter. So there are millions of people who are denied human rights solely because they cannot afford the cost of requirement for the enforcement of rights. So, not apart from India, if we see there are so many countries in the world. In those countries, there are millions of people who live in those countries. So there are a lot of people that are actually denied human rights because they cannot afford the cost of the enforcement of their rights. So if we merely talk about human rights, okay, from the illicit platform, it is not sufficient. Like if we illicit platform means if we talk about human rights only from the point of view of a person who already has sufficient means, it is not sufficient, right? In order to do social justice for them and make human rights meaningful, legal aid becomes essential. So, in order to do social justice and to make human rights more meaningful, legal aid also becomes essential. Human rights which cannot be enforced due to poverty are meaningless, right? Because human rights comprise of everyone, irrespective of what is their stand in the society, they're rich or they're poor, right? So human rights which are not enforced just because a person is poor, it's meaningless and it's worthless. A right to access justice is sine qua non for social justice, means is very important for social justice. Sine qua non. Access to justice itself is one of the most basic human rights, right? So access to justice is something that is very basic. Every person should be given and allowed to access justice. Without it, the realization of many other human rights may become difficult. Indeed, the right to access justice or legal aid is evolved by judicial creativity, especially if we see in the case of India, it has been evolved throughout the years. We have seen 1953, 60, then 87, etc. So it has evolved by the judicial creativity for the poor people. Now, neither it is possible nor it is proper to isolate the right to legal aid from the range of human rights. So the reason is obvious. So mere declaration and passing of resolutions about human rights are not enough. So like just passing number of laws or number of you know committees just getting formed just for the sake of name, just to show that, oh, we are also having committees, etc., but not not having sufficient, it's not implemented sufficient, it's not satisfying the needs of population, it's not enough, right? It won't be enough. So just passing declarations and resolutions about human rights are not enough. We have to guarantee for the enforcement of these rights is very important and essential. Hence, it will not be incorrect to say that right to legal aid stands first in the species of human rights. Human rights are only mere pious declaration without legal aid, right? They're just verbal statements or verbal wordings, without the legal aid that is given. They become lucrative only when they're enforced. They become, mandatory. They stand out only when they are enforced. The right to legal aid enables the accomplishment of these human rights and makes them worthwhile for the poor masses in the world. In the present legal system of most countries, justice is not given but sold. In the present legal system of most countries, okay, they have repeated this statement. So justice is not given but sold. Consumers of justice have to pay the remuneration of counsel and bear expenses. So what is the meaning of this sentence? Justice is not given but sold. See, justice should be given. It's not something that should be sold, right? Like, suppose if I come up to the court of law with a problem, I expect that I should be provided justice for that. It's not merely, selling off my problem. Like, uh, if we see the consumers of justice, they have to pay a lot of different for a lot of different purposes, like remuneration of counsel. They have to bear the court fees also, and also other contingent charges. So indeed, poverty is an obstacle in the way of getting justice, right? Because a poor person does not have sufficient meat to meet, to meet all these requirements, right? For the council, for the court fees, and etc. It's an obstacle then for the poor people, and due to this reason, the poor becomes a sufferer of social injustice. Legal aid is the only way for providing social justice to all. Legal aid indeed is an integral part of human rights and it requires urgent considerations. Otherwise, there is an apprehension that someday the patience of poor person will be exhausted and that will endanger world peace. So this is what the entire chapter was about. Hope this lecture was somewhat useful and it provided insights to what the chapter was talking about. Hopefully, I explained everything in the way that is easy to understand and that the points are laid down concisely. Um, yeah, so this was all about this chapter. Um, and the next lecture will be coming very soon. And thank you all for seeing this lecture. If you liked it and if you are seeing it till the end, please do not forget to like the video and please comment also about how it went. If there's some recommendations about how I should teach or what should I improve in the quality, please let me know that. And also a small request that to the viewers who have watched the entire video till the end, I want you to do this small homework of writing all the articles and section amendment acts in this chapter in the comment box down below, so that it helps you remember it easily and it also helps you retain those acts, because legal studies is a subject in which you will be seeing a lot of acts, a lot of amendments, a lot of articles, etc. So it is very important that you know the correct article, the correct meaning of those articles. As I've already discussed in this chapter, there are a lot of different articles and a lot of different keywords that we have seen. A small request, a small homework is that viewers who have watched till the end, please do not forget to write all those articles in the comment box below, so that if any person in future comes and watches this video and scrolls to the comment box, they get a concise, in a short way, all the articles that have been mentioned in this chapter. Thank you all once again, and hope you all enjoyed this.